Okay, so let's dive into a world where friendships made online, I guess, have the power to really blur those lines between reality and fantasy.
Yeah.
And picture two boys. Gabriel, he was 12, a bright kid, and Daniel, his 16-year-old friend known for his temper.
Mm,
They're both super into this online game called Tibia,
right.
and in Tibia, fortunes are made and lost
Yeah, virtually.
in the blink of an eye.
Or at least virtually.
Yeah, exactly, virtual coins. But what starts as like a little squabble over these virtual coins turns into this horrible real-life tragedy.
It's crazy.
It is. It's a story of betrayal rage, and it really shows just how devastating anger can be in this digital age.
Yeah, for sure.
Welcome to CrimePod Castle's Twisted Crime series.
This case, it's just wild how something so seemingly trivial, like a dispute over virtual currency, could have such a horrific end.
Yeah, I mean,
It's hard to wrap your head around.
it really highlights how much young people can get caught up in these online worlds.
Like, it's their whole world.
Yeah, and how much they struggle with resolving conflict, especially
When things get really emotional.
yeah, when emotions run high, it's like all logic goes out the window.
Exactly.
So these Tibia coins, were they like digital gold to these boys or something?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for them, those coins meant status power success within the game.
Yeah, you know?
It's easy to just brush it off as, oh, it's just a game.
Right.
But for a lot of young people, these online worlds are a huge part of their social lives, how they see themselves even.
Their whole identity is wrapped up in it.
Exactly. And when there's conflicts like that, those feelings of betrayal and unfairness, they're so real and intense for them.
Like it's not just a game anymore.
No, not at all.
So how did this argument over the coins get so out of control?
Well, it started with Gabriel borrowing 20,000 Tibia coins from Daniel,
Oh, wow.
and he promised to pay him back.
Okay.
But as time went on and Gabriel still hadn't paid him back, tensions started to rise.
Yeah, you can imagine.
And Gabriel started avoiding Daniel in the game and even blocked him on social media.
Oh, wow. So just complete ghosting.
Basically, now put yourself in the shoes of a teenager already impulsive emotional.
Right.
You feel betrayed by your friend and you're trying to talk to them, but they're just ignoring you.
That's got to sting.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it is. And for Daniel, this feeling of being betrayed, ignored, disrespected, it just fueled his anger.
Right.
And we know he already had problems with anger management.
He did. There are reports of him being aggressive in the past and struggling in social situations.
So he didn't really have the best coping mechanisms.
Not really. This pre-existing difficulty with controlling his emotions on top of the situation he felt was so unfair.
Right.
It created like a perfect storm.
Like a ticking time bomb almost.
Yeah, almost like a
But-
pressure cooker with no release valve.
So what happened next? How did this online fight turn into a real-life confrontation?
On July 23, 2007, Daniel went to Gabriel's house
Okay.
to supposedly work things out over these Tibia coins. But what started as like a simple meeting quickly turned dark.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Daniel was so angry and had this warped sense of justice, and he just brutally attacked Gabriel.
it's hard to imagine the level of violence that happened.
It's awful.
It wasn't just a disagreement, it was brutal and merciless.
You're right. Daniel's attack was way more than just a typical teenage fight.
Right.
It was this vicious, sustained assault fueled by rage.
It's just hard to comprehend.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
He beat Gabriel so badly and ended up strangling him.
God. And the scariest part is this wasn't like a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion.
No.
It seems like there was some planning involved, which is scary considering Daniel's age.
Absolutely. The brutality and what Daniel did afterwards suggests he planned this.
Right.
After he killed Gabriel, he tried to hide the body in the attic.
Oh, wow.
And when that didn't work, he tried to dismember the body to hide what he had done.
That's chilling.
I
It's
felt-
just a truly awful detail
Yeah.
that shows us this young mind completely panicking
Yeah.
and coldly trying to get away with what he did.
This attempt to cover up what he did makes it seem like he wasn't really sorry in the immediate aftermath. Right. It's like this chilling detachment that's both fascinating and really disturbing.
It is. It really raises questions about his mental state.
Yeah.
How the online world messed with his sense of reality and just the complexities of teenagers when they're dealing with such extreme emotions.
Exactly. And it reminds us that the digital world can be a breeding ground for distorted thinking, exaggerated feelings, and this blurring of what's real and what's just in the game.
Right. And in this case, that blurring had fatal consequences.
It did. Yeah, it's a stark reminder that the digital world has its benefits, for sure.
Yeah.
But it can also be a breeding ground for twisted thinking, exaggerated emotions, and just this blurring between what's real and what's virtual.
And in this case, that blurring had fatal consequences.
Yeah, it did.
So what happened after the crime? How did the authorities get involved?
Well, Daniel's attempts to hide what he did fell apart pretty quickly. I mean, he was panicking and he was just so clumsy trying to hide the body that people got suspicious.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Which led to his arrest. And when he confessed, he didn't really seem sorry at all. He even tried to blame Gabriel, saying that the betrayal over those tibia coins justified what he did.
So he was trying to justify murdering his friend over some virtual coins.
Yeah. It's chilling how he tried to rationalize something so brutal.
It is. That lack of remorse.
Yeah.
It's got to be a complex psychological response.
It is. It could be a defense mechanism. A way to deal with the overwhelming guilt and horror of what he did.
Like his brain just couldn't handle it.
Or it could be that he genuinely didn't understand how serious his crime was.
Yeah.
Which again just shows that disconnect between online and real-world consequences.
This case, it really makes you think about how complex people are, especially teenagers.
Definitely.
You have these young minds still developing, dealing with intense emotions, navigating this digital world,
Right.
which can be great, but also really dangerous.
Exactly.
And sometimes those lines between fantasy and reality get completely blurred.
This case really highlights how important it is for parents and kids to talk openly about online interactions and to teach kids healthy ways to deal with anger and frustration.
Yeah, like how to deal with conflict without resorting to violence.
Exactly. And we need to teach them how to behave responsibly online.
It's all about education prevention.
For sure.
So what happened to Daniel? What were the legal consequences?
Well, since Daniel was a minor when he committed the crime, he was tried in juvenile court.
Okay.
And the sentence was 3 years in a juvenile detention center.
3 years. That's it.
Yeah, that's the maximum sentence under Brazilian law.
Wow. I can only imagine how people reacted to that.
Oh, people were outraged. A lot of people felt the sentence was way too lenient.
Right, like a slap on the wrist.
Exactly. They said it didn't reflect how brutal the crime was or the impact it had on Gabriel's family and the community.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The case really sparked this huge debate about juvenile justice.
Right, like, are we being too easy on young offenders?
Exactly. Is rehabilitation more important than punishment?
It's tough. You want to hold people accountable, but you also want to give young people a chance to turn their lives around.
It's a really complicated issue.
It is. And how do you balance the needs of the offender with the rights of the victim and what society wants?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a debate that's still going on today. This case makes us think about some uncomfortable truths about responsibility, the purpose of punishment, and the possibility of rehab, especially for young people.
Right.
I mean, on the one hand, you have this desire for revenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, eye for an eye.
Right.
But on the other hand, you have to remember that teenagers are still developing.
Their brains aren't fully formed.
So there's always the potential for them to change, to learn from their mistakes and become responsible members of society.
Yeah, it's a balancing act that requires looking at each case individually.
Right.
Doing psychological evaluations.
Making sure there's support and resources both within the justice system and the community.
We can't just ignore the fact that young people can do terrible things.
But we also can't give up on the idea that they can change.
Exactly. We need to guide them towards healing and taking responsibility for their actions.
This case, even though it's so tragic, it shows us that we need to talk about these tough issues.
Yeah.
Not just in the legal system, but in our families, schools, communities.
Everywhere.
We need to give young people the tools to handle the digital world.
Yeah, to manage their emotions.
And to deal with conflict peacefully.
We need to teach them empathy, how to behave online and create a culture where violence is never the answer. It's also important to remember that while this case shows how dangerous the internet can be, most kids use it without doing anything violent.
That's true.
It's about finding the right balance,
Right.
using the good parts of technology while minimizing the risks.
So education, open communication, and a supportive community are key.
Absolutely. It's about creating a society where everyone is treated with empathy and respect, where people can talk openly and where they have the skills to resolve conflicts peacefully.
The Gabriel Kuhn and Daniel Petry case is a horrible example of what can happen when those things are missing.
It really is. And it's a case that continues to fascinate and haunt people who learn about it.
It's hard to forget something like that.
The brutality, the fact that it started over something so insignificant, the way the virtual and real worlds got mixed up.
And the ongoing debate about how to deal with young offenders, it's also fascinating and unsettling.
Yeah.
So what about Daniel? Did he ever show any remorse for what he did? What happened to him after he got out of juvenile detention?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? Did he ever really understand what he did, the damage he caused?
Well, the details of Daniel's life after he was released are pretty much a mystery.
Oh, wow.
There's not much information out there about whether he tried to change how he fit back into society or if he ever really showed any remorse for what he did.
It's like he just vanished, leaving this unsettling silence.
Yeah.
And that silence, I bet, makes the pain and the unanswered questions even worse for Gabriel's family and friends. Absolutely. Not having any closure, not knowing what happened to Daniel, makes it so much harder for them to heal.
It just feels so unfair, like there's no justice.
It does leave this huge void that's hard to fill.
This case really shows us that justice isn't always black and white.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are no easy answers, and finding closure can be a long and difficult process.
It's true. That's why it's important to focus on what we can do to prevent these kinds of tragedies from happening again.
Like what?
We need to have honest conversations about the challenges young people face in the digital world,
Right.
the pressures they're under, the importance of having healthy ways to deal with anger, frustration, and conflict.
It's about creating a culture of empathy and respect both online and offline,
Yeah,
where asking for help is seen as a strength, not a weakness.
exactly. And it's about giving young people the critical thinking skills they need to navigate the digital world.
To separate fact from fiction.
Yeah, and to make good choices in their online interactions.
This case, it's a wake-up call. A reminder that we can't just sit back and do nothing when it comes to our kids.
Right.
We need parents, educators, policymakers, and communities to work together
To create a safer, more supportive environment for young people.
so that tragedies like this don't happen anymore.
It's about building a world where young people feel valued, understood, and equipped to deal with the challenges they face both online and offline.
And it's about remembering Gabriel,
Yeah.
the young boy whose life was cut short, and honoring his memory by working towards a future where this kind of violence is unimaginable.
Well said. This case, the Gabriel Kuhn and Daniel Petry case, it's a haunting reminder of what can happen when rage goes unchecked.
It really is.
And it shows just how urgently we need to do something to address youth violence in this digital age.
It makes us face some uncomfortable truths
It does.
and have some tough conversations, and ultimately we need to work towards a world where every young person feels safe, supported, and empowered to be their best selves.
I think that's a great goal to strive for.
Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the dark side of human nature.
It was my pleasure.
If you found this exploration of the Gabriel Kuhn and Daniel Petry case insightful, be sure to follow CrimePod Castle for more deep dives into true crime cases.
We have so many more fascinating and sometimes disturbing stories to share.
We really want to shed light on these dark corners of humanity to help people understand, empathize, and hopefully make a positive difference.
And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for even more content.
You'll find video versions of our episodes and some cool behind-the-scenes stuff.
It's worth checking out.
So stay curious, stay safe, and as always, stay vigilant.